from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 4th chapter, 32nd verse. Evam traliko garuna sandishta shabdayonida parayashrama adasya harimije samadina evam triloka garuna sandishta shabdayonina Parariyashramam asadya haramija samadina evam triloka guruna sandishta shabdayonina Parariyashramam asadya harimije samadina Idam Triloka Guruna Sarishta Sadayonina Parayashrama Sadya Harimije Samadina Evam thus Triloka, 3 worlds, Guruna, by the spiritual master, Sandishtaha, being perfectly taught, Shabdayonina, by one who is the source of all Vedic knowledge, Parayashramam, in the pilgrimage site of Badarikashram, Asadya, reaching, Harim, unto the Lord, Ej, satisfied, Samadhina, by trance. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Shukadeva Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge, and the spiritual master of the 3 worlds, reached the pilgrimage site of Badarikashrama and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. Responsively, Shukadeva Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge and the spiritual master of the 3 worlds, reached the pilgrimage site of Badarikashrama and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Lord Sri Krishna is factually the spiritual master of the original source of all Vedic knowledge. It is very difficult, however, to understand the personality and the personal feature of this absolute truth, even from the Vedas. His personal instructions are needed in order to understand the personality of Godhead as the supreme absolute truth. Bhagavad Gita is the evidence of such transcendental knowledge in gist. One cannot know the Supreme Lord unless one is graced by the Lord himself. Lord Krishna exhibited this specific mercy towards Arjuna and Uddhava while he was still in the material world. Undoubtedly, Bhagavad Gita was spoken by the Lord on the battlefield of Kurukshetra just to encourage Arjuna to fight, and yet to complete the transcendental knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, the Lord instructed Uddhava. The Lord wanted Uddhava to fulfill the mission of disseminating the knowledge which he had not spoken even in Bhagavad Gita. Persons who are attached to the words of the Vedas may also know from this verse that the Lord is the source of all Vedic knowledge. One who is unable to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead by going through the pages of the Vedas may take shelter of one of the Lord's devotees, such as Uddhava, in order to advance further in knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Brahma Samhita says that it is the Vedas, and that it is very difficult. The Brahma Samhita says that it is very difficult to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead from the Vedas, but is easily understood from a pure devotees like Uddhava. Taking mercy on the great sage who lived at Badarikashram, The Lord authorized Uddhava to speak on his behalf. Unless one has such authorization, one cannot understand or preach the devotional service of the Lord. While present on this earth, the Lord executed many uncommon activities, even traveling in space to bring down the Parijata from heaven, and recovering the son of his teacher, Sandipani Muni, from the regions of death. Uddhava was certainly informed of the conditions of life on other planets, and all the sages were anxious to know of them, just as we are anxious to know about the planets in space. Uddhava was particularly deputed to carry a message to Badarikashram, not only to the sages of that place of pilgrimage, but also to the Narayan deities. Such a message must have been more confidential than the knowledge described in the pages of the Vedas. The Lord is undoubtedly the source of all knowledge, and the messages dispatched through Uddhava to Narayan and other sages were also part of the Vedic knowledge, but they were more confidential and could be sent or understood only through such a pure devotee as Uddhava. Since such confidential knowledge was known only to the Lord and Uddhava, it is said that Uddhava was as good as the Lord himself. Every living entity can, like Uddhava, also become a confidential messenger on the same level as the Lord, provided he becomes confidential himself by dint of loving devotional service. Such confidential devotees like Uddhava and Arjuna, such confidential knowledge is entrusted, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, only to pure devotees like Uddhava and Arjuna, and one has to learn the mystery through them, and not otherwise. One cannot understand Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam without the help of such confidential knowledge, without the help of such confidential devotees of the Lord. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that confidential message must have concerned the mystery of his, capital H, his departure and the annihilation of, capital H, his dynasty after the end of the appearance of his appearance, capital H, his appearance in the mundane world for 100 years. Everyone must have been very anxious to know about the mystery of the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, and that message must have been explained by the Lord to Uddhava and dispatched to Badarikashram for the information of Narayan and other pure devotees of the Lord. The verse again, Shukadeva Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge and the spiritual master of the three worlds, reached the pilgrimage site of Badarikashrama and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. Om Gyanati Mirandasya Ganaranjana Salakaya Chaksur Idmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobistam Shtapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swaparantikam. This is a very important verse and a very important purport that Srila Prabhupada has written. What he's explaining is that the Vedas alone are insufficient, and that one has to engage oneself in conversation with devotees of the Lord who have realized this supreme knowledge. Srila Prabhupada was one of those people who one could converse with, one of those people who we think was more advanced than we are. In 1966, he gave a talk in Berkeley. University of California at Berkeley is rated as number 20, and it has about 30 to 40,000 undergraduate students. So he gave a class in a very big auditorium. It was quite a dark place, and the devotees and Prabhupada were all on the stage. And he gave a talk for about half an hour or so, and then he asked for questions. And during the question period, one of the students asked him, what is the good of your transcendental knowledge? I'm learning a lot of technology here in the University of California at Berkeley, and I'm going to take this knowledge and go back to India and better life in India, better the living conditions in India with this knowledge. So it was very dark, and we couldn't see the person who was asking the question. It was in a big darkened room. About 500 people were there. They were all breathing, but they were there. But they were very quiet. We could just hear them breathing. And then Prabhupada discerned that the person who was asking the question was from India. And he said, "Oh, an Indian?" And this was probably the first time that I ever saw Prabhupada get a little angry. And he lashed out at this student. And he said, "You have come to the United States because you are trying to gain some material knowledge that you want to take back to India and make life there better. You," he said, in not so many words, "you are a beggar." And in not so many words, he said that I am a giver. But he was very angry. And the student was very quiet after this. It was very quiet in the hall. We could say that the hall rang in silence. No one knew what to say because they didn't expect this outburst to come from Srila Prabhupada. But he was very distressed that a person had come all the way from India to learn technology, to bring back to India, to beg something from the United States, and to bring it back to better the life in India. So it was very quiet after that. And he had made his point. So the point that Prabhupada is making in this verse is that in order to get the gist of Vedic knowledge, we have to be instructed either by Krishna or someone who is empowered by Krishna to speak on his behalf. So we have a verse that talks about the 12 Mahajans, and I'll read that a little bit later. It's also in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it's mentioned in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that there are 12 Mahajans. Swayambhur is the first one, that's Lord Brahma, and it ends with Bhishma Valaki Bayar. And the person speaking this verse is Vyasaki, and Vaya is the name that's given sometimes to Vyasaki, and to the name that's given to Vidura, who is Yamaraj. And the verse ends with Yama, the Yamaraj. And so in order to understand fully Vedic knowledge, one has to consult with Mahajans, or a realized person. And there's a stipulation in the fourth verse of the Nectar of Instruction that one should develop confidentiality only with a few people. Guyamakyati Prichati means that there is confidential information as well as public information. And public knowledge wasn't disseminated to everyone. When Lord Chaitanya was present on the earth, he spoke mainly Vedanta philosophy to Prakashananda Saraswati, and in the beginning to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, because he was also studied in impersonalism. So Prabhupada didn't speak the confidential knowledge at first to him, and throughout his conversations with Prakashananda Saraswati, he spoke only Vedanta philosophy. So Swayambhur, Narado, Shambho, there's 12 people who are considered authorities. And at the end of the Gayatri mantra, it is said that Atamsa Astaya Paramanishtam Yashitam Borvatamayar Madbi. It's something we have to say as sannyasis each day. The transcendental knowledge cannot be understood by books alone, but it has to be understood by people who are in knowledge. It is said in the Gayatri mantra that Lord Chaitanya approved of this song of the Avanti Brahman. The verse that we sing, Etamsa Astaya Paratmanishtam Yashitam Borvata Mayarmadbi Amtarishami Daranta Param Tarmama Kundangari Shevayaiva is a verse that was sung by the Ajanti Brahman. And Lord Chaitanya thought this was a very important verse, and he said that the verse that he spoke was approved by the previous acharyas who were fixed in firm devotion to the Lord, Paramatma, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So unless there was approval by the Mahajans or the great souls, the verse was somewhat incomplete. So the completeness of the verse had to be hearing what was said. So the verse, the Mahajana verse reads, Svayam Narada Shambhu, Kumara Kapilomanu, Palado Janako Bhishmo, Balir Vyasaki Vayam. And it was spoken by Vyam, who is Yamaraj. And this is quoted in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the 6th canto, in the 3rd chapter, 20th verse. And also it is said that in the 11th canto that one has to be careful what one speaks, and one has to be friendly to everyone, of course, and especially to devotees. But the verse reads says that, and in a previous class I said it was found in the Sandarbhas, and I quoted the Jiva Goswami had recited this, and this is how it goes. Sharp arrows which pierce one's chest and reach the heart do not cause as much suffering as the arrows of harsh, insulting words that become lodged within the heart when spoken by uncivilized men. So what happens is that words can penetrate and be, by way of explanation, be more painful than arrows that are stuck to the body, even if they approach the heart area. So this is the verse. There's another verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is not the Svajati verse, but it refers to it. It's from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 29th verse, 17th text, 29th chapter, 17th text. And in the purport, Prabhupada says that friendship, this is what he writes, friendship should be cemented between persons with mutual interests and understanding. Such persons are said to be Svajati, quote, of the same caste, unquote. The devotee should avoid a person whose character is not fixed in standard understanding, even though he may be a Vaishnava or a devotee of Krishna. If his character is not correctly represented, then he should be avoided. So it also means that even amongst the devotees, even though we're friendly to everyone and we're seeing everyone as more advanced or more learned than we are, some people are to be avoided. I mean, not that we're not friendly with them, but they're to be avoided. And friendship is to be cemented between like-minded people. So if we find people that we are familiar with or vibrate with, we can be confidential with them. That's the meaning of confidential. So this is the meaning of confidential. And Prabhupada writes in the purport how we can't understand Vedic knowledge just from the Vedas. We have to understand it from people who are more advanced than we are. When Vidura, who is an incarnation of Yamaraj, was instructing Dhritarashtra, his elder brother, he was considered very saintly. Even though he was born of a Sudra, he was cursed by Manduka Muni, who said his punishment was too harsh against Manduka Muni. So Manduka Muni cursed Yamaraj that he would have to be born as a Sudra in the material world. So Vidura took birth from a maidservant, a Sudrani, mother. And but still he was considered very saintly, even though he was of a so-called lower caste. And at some point, he left the palace of Dhritarashtra, who was supporting him in many ways, giving him food, giving him shelter. And he realized that this person, Dhritarashtra, was materialistic, that he was wanting, even though he was blind, he wanted to have the kingdom that he was entitled to, that he thought he was entitled to anyway. And that he was the one who was responsible for starting the Kurukshetra war with his 100 sons and against the Pandavas. Of course, the Pandavas were victorious, but he's the one who started. And it was Vidura who brought him to his senses, and eventually Dhritarashtra left the palace and and visited some holy places with Vidura. And Vidura's conversations with Maitreya, who was much more advanced than he, and with Uddhava, are considered very important. And Prabhupada talks about in the 11th canto, talks about the importance of Uddhava, and he was considered like Arjuna, very confidential. And therefore, the part of the 11th canto is known as the Uddhava Gita, because he completes the instruction of the Gita, which is given to Arjuna. In a sense, the whole Bhagavad Gita was instructed to Arjuna to engage him in one of the rasas known as anger. And Arjuna wanted to be peaceful at the beginning, and he didn't want to fight, and he didn't want to take advantage of his relatives who were on the other side. And he was considered to be very saintly. He was very pure, and because he was nonviolent. But in the end, after instructing him on the entire Bhagavad Gita, he said, "Yes, I'm going to fight." That was his duty, and Krishna convinced him that it was his duty to do exactly that. So one should seek out advanced devotees and establish relationships with them. And what Prabhupada says, if matters are discussed between devotees, they could discuss these matters. And the word he used was threadbare. I don't know if you know what threadbare means, but it's pretty obvious. And in order to come to a deeper understanding. When I was at university, we used to hear from various instructors that it was important to discuss, not only to read the books that we were stipulated to read, but that we were to discuss the meaning of them with other students to come to a deeper meaning so that we would be successful in our endeavors. So Prabhupada adopted the same principle that we should discuss among ourselves the strictures and the injunctions of the Vedas so that we can arrive at a deeper meaning to understand what they mean. So if there are any comments or questions, please ask away. So if there's none, we'll end here. With the anger. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, it's just a simple, what do I do with this? Huh? Hello? Just simply understanding that the rasa you mentioned with Arjuna, he was instructed to use that rasa, and Prabhupada's anger, we see it in the same light. Prabhupada's anger, that's coming from Krishna and utilised in the proper way, obviously. I mean, Prabhupada, pure devotee. Do we see it in the same way?
It's not one of the principal means that Prabhupada was always very friendly, but on occasions he would exhibit some other things, just like Bhishma exhibited the chivalrous or ghastly attitude when he appreciated the fact that Krishna was firing arrows at Arjuna, and some of them struck Bhishma in the chest and drew blood. And Vishwanath Chakravarti comments that this feeling to Krishna was not pain; it was like a love bite. Because it was a rasa, a ghastly rasa, or a chivalrous rasa.
We know Prabhupada apologised at the final chapter of his life about his anger and his seemingly, strong strength of character towards certain situations. Also.
Yeah, from what I remember, he asked people to forgive him if he was too harsh with them during his lifetime. So those are some other points.
Okay, thank you, Maharaj.
Yes?
Maharaj, this 11th canto, the Uddhava Gita, sometimes by purpose like this is brought to light, but it doesn't seem to be emphasised that much in ISKCON as something that we should study. And also it's tucked away right back in the 11th canto. Could you have anything to say about that, about the significance?
Well, Prabhupada did say that we should read all of the Srimad Bhagavatam, not just the first canto and second canto and third canto, but all of it. So even the 11th canto and even the 10th canto, which is very advanced, was written by Prabhupada before he expired. And he has taught us that it is called the Uddhava Gita. It's part of Bhagavad Gita, so it's important for us to read everything and to try to understand what is the meaning of these things. So, any other questions or points?
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Maharaj. I was explaining there about him giving the confidential knowledge about Krishna's disappearance. So it seems like, and this is just a comment, maybe you can comment, it seems like it is very confidential because in the Hindu society, people are aware of the Leela of what's it called, Mausala Leela, where Krishna withdrew his Yadu dynasty. And it's even a little hard, when you read the 11th canto, how, there was a fratricidal war and all the warriors suddenly killed each other. But no, you read the purports and there's a bit more kind of insight into how it's a bit of a dreamlike kind of pastime. Would you like to comment on that at all, Maharaj?
Well, the disappearance of the Yadu dynasty and Krishna are in a sense very confidential, but because Uddhava and Vidura were very advanced, they wanted to hear about all these incidents, even though The Goswamis call them magical performances. In one sense, they're not real, but in another sense, they are very real. And Krishna he left a material body in order to, Prabhupada says, to delude the atheists. So it's a very confidential subject, and Prabhupada didn't discuss it with everybody, but it is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam because Bhagavatam is the source of all knowledge. And the very advanced devotees want to know these very abstruse and sort of confidential topics. Even though they're difficult to understand, they wanted to know what it was. And it's mentioned that Krishna, after his 100 years, actually he lived 125 years on the earth, that he was very, the advanced devotees want to know everything about him, about his journey on this, his sojourn on the earth, even though some of it was difficult to understand and very unpleasant. And it was extremely unpleasant that Krishna had to leave the earth. But it happened because he was only here temporarily to perform certain functions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Anything else? Okay, we'll end there. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
HH Mukunda Goswami.